The first sign that my marriage was unraveling came in the form of a password change. After 8 years together, Thaddeus and I had shared everything: bank accounts, streaming services, and even each other's phone passwords. It wasn't about surveillance, but practically. I often needed to check our joint calendar on his phone, or he'd use mine to order takeout when his battery died. So when my thumbprint suddenly stopped working on his iPhone one Tuesday evening in March, I noticed immediately. "Did you change your phone password?" I asked casually, looking up from the black screen that had just rejected my thumb. Thaddeus glanced up from his laptop, his expression briefly flickering before settling into careful neutrality. "Yeah, work policy. New security protocols. They're making everyone use more complex passwords and change them regularly now." It was a reasonable explanation. As an executive at a healthcare technology company, Thaddeus dealt with sensitive information. Tightening security made sense. "No problem," I said. "What's the new one?" He hesitated just long enough for me to register it as unusual. "It's complicated, like 16 characters with symbols, company requirement. I'll just unlock it for you when you need it." I nodded and let it drop, though a small knot of unease formed in my stomach. That night, I found myself watching him more carefully, the way he angled his screen away slightly when texting, how he took his phone with him to the bathroom, the subtle shift in his demeanor when notifications appeared. Lydia, my therapist, had often talked about trusting my intuition. "Your body knows things before your mind is ready to acknowledge them," she'd told me during one of our sessions dealing with my anxiety. I'd been seeing her for 2 years, working through the lingering trauma from my parents' volatile relationship and my own resulting fear of conflict. The therapy had been Thaddeus's idea initially. "I just want you to be happy, Ren," he'd said with what I'd interpreted as love and concern. "Sometimes your anxiety gets in the way of that." He wasn't wrong. My anxiety had been a third presence in our relationship since the beginning, a shadow that occasionally darkened otherwise perfect days, causing me to catastrophize minor disagreements or seek constant reassurance that everything was okay. Thaddeus had been patient, supportive, my rock during panic attacks, which is why the growing distance between us over the following weeks was so disorienting. The password change was followed by late work nights, weekend emergencies at the office, and a new gym routine that had him leaving the house at odd hours. Classic signs, I suppose, though I was desperately searching for alternative explanations. "Maybe it's just a rough patch," I told my sister Meredith over coffee one Saturday morning, while Thaddeus was supposedly at a work retreat. Every marriage has them. Meredith gave me the direct look that had both comforted and irritated me throughout our childhood. At 39, 4 years my senior, she'd never lost that big sister frankness. "Ren, honey, you're a psychologist. If one of your clients described these behaviors in their spouse, what would you suspect?" She had a point. Though I specialized in adolescent psychology at the community mental health center where I worked, the patterns were obvious enough that even my teenage clients would recognize them. "I know," I sighed. "I just don't want to be the suspicious, unstable wife checking his phone and demanding to know his whereabouts. That's not who I am. That's not who we are." "There's a difference between being controlling and protecting yourself," Meredith said gently. "And gathering information isn't the same as jumping to conclusions." She was right, of course. Which is why that evening, when Thaddeus fell asleep on the couch with his phone unlocked beside him, I made a choice I never thought I'd make in my marriage. I picked it up. What I found sent my world tilting on its axis. Text to someone saved as LR filled with intimate exchanges, plans for meetings at hotels, and complaints about me and my neediness, my issues, my instability. "Sometimes I feel like I'm walking on eggshells with her," one of his texts read. "Everything triggers her anxiety. It's exhausting being someone's emotional support animal 24/7s. The words stung worse than the evidence of physical infidelity. This was betrayal on multiple levels, not just breaking our vows but rewriting the narrative of our entire relationship. In his version, I wasn't his partner but his burden. With shaking hands, I took screenshots and emailed them to myself before carefully returning his phone. Then I went to our guest room and silently closed the door, my mind racing with the impossible decisions that now lay before me. What I couldn't know then was that these screenshots evidence gathered in a moment of heartbreaking. Clarity would become my salvation 16 months later when Thaddeus stood before a judge and portrayed me as too unstable to be trusted. For 3 days I carried the knowledge of Thaddeus's betrayal like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I went through the motions, went to work, counseled my teenage clients about healthy relationships and self-respect, came home, prepared dinner, and maintained conversations about mundane topics with a man who had become a stranger to me. On the fourth day, I sat him down in our living room after dinner. "I know about LR," I said simply, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The color drained from his face, then returned in a flush of anger. "You went through my phone?" This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior I've been dealing with. The immediate deflection, turning his betrayal into my transgression, was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Almost. "Yes, I looked at your phone. After months of password changes, mysterious work emergencies, and you pulling away. And I found exactly what my paranoia suspected." I kept my voice calm, factual. "Who is she?" He stared at me, calculating. I could almost see him running through possible responses, weighing denials against admissions. "Lynette Reeves," he finally said. "She's a consultant who works with my department." "How long?" Another pause. 4 months, I nodded, absorbing this timeline that rewrote half a year of my memories. Holidays, our anniversary, everyday moments, all now cast in the shadow of deception. "I want marriage counseling," I said, surprising myself with the words. Despite everything, some part of me wasn't ready to give up on 8 years together. "If there's anything left to save, we need professional help." Thaddeus looked relieved, perhaps having expected an immediate demand for divorce. "Of course. Whatever you want, Ren. I'll make it right." He reached for my hand. "I never meant to hurt you. Things with Lynette just happened." I pulled my hand away. "Things don't just happen. You made choices. Repeatedly." His expression hardened slightly. "You haven't exactly been easy to live with, you know? Your anxiety, your neediness." "Stop." I cut him off. "My mental health isn't an excuse for your infidelity. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. We could have worked on it together. I tried. Why do you think I suggested therapy?" "He's claiming what?" I stared at my lawyer, Imani Foster, across her desk. The manila folder containing Thaddeus's divorce filing lay open between us, its clinical language belying the viciousness of its allegations. "That your history of anxiety and therapy constitute evidence of mental instability," Imani summarized. Her expression professionally neutral but with a hint of outrage in her dark eyes. "He's requesting a psychological evaluation and suggesting that your perception of events, including his infidelity, may be distorted by your condition." I felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath me. In 8 years of marriage, Thaddeus had positioned himself as my biggest supporter, the one person who understood my anxiety and never judged me for it. Now he was using that same vulnerability as a weapon. That's absurd," I managed. "I'm a licensed psychologist. I work with vulnerable adolescents. If I were unstable, wouldn't that have affected my professional standing?" Imani nodded, making notes. "Exactly the point we'll make. Your career provides strong evidence of your competence and stability. Do you have performance reviews from work? Letters from colleagues or supervisors?" "Of course. So my last evaluation was excellent. My clinical director has always been supportive." "Good. We'll need all of that." She looked up from her notepad. "Now about these allegations of infidelity, do you have evidence?" I thought of the screenshots I'd taken months ago, still saved in a folder in my email. "Yes, text messages between him and the woman he was seeing. They're pretty explicit about the relationship. And how did you obtain these messages?" I hesitated. I looked at his phone while he was asleep. I know it sounds like a spouse who had reasonable suspicions and found confirmation. Imani interrupted smoothly. "You had shared passwords and access to each other's devices throughout the marriage, correct?" "Yes, until he suddenly changed his password. Then there's no issue with how you obtained the information." She made another note. "Those texts will be crucial, especially if he's trying to paint you as paranoid or delusional about his behavior." As we continued discussing strategy, a picture emerged of what Thaddeus was attempting, a preemptive attack on my credibility to position himself favorably for the division of our assets and to control the narrative of our marriage's dissolution. "He's overplayed his hand," Imani concluded as our meeting ended. "By making your mental health the centerpiece of his strategy, he's opened a door we can walk right through. Now we just need to gather the evidence to counteract his claims." Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled documentation of my professional accomplishments, testimonials from colleagues, and records from Lydia confirming that my therapy had been for generalized anxiety, a common condition that in no way impaired my judgment or perception of reality. But the most powerful evidence remained those screenshots, dozens of exchanges that not only confirmed Thaddeus's affair, but revealed the calculated way he had undermined my confidence while presenting himself as supportive. "I tell her the anxiety is something we're facing together," he had texted Lynette, "but honestly it's convenient sometimes. When she questions things that don't add up, I can always suggest she's catastrophizing. Works like a charm." Reading those words again sent a chill through me. For years, I trusted Thaddeus's perspective when he gently suggested I might be overreacting or misinterpreting situations. How much of my anxiety had actually been accurate intuition that he had deliberately undermined? The revelation was both devastating and empowering. Devastating to recognize the extent of his manipulation. Empowering to reclaim trust in my own perceptions. Our first court appearance was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early October, a preliminary hearing to establish temporary arrangements while the divorce proceeded. Thaddeus arrived with his attorney, Malcolm Winters, a silver-haired man with an aggressive reputation in family law circles. They looked confident, exchanging small smiles as the proceedings began. Judge Harriet Okonkwo, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the initial filings with careful attention. "I see Mr. Bennett has raised concerns about Mrs. Bennett's mental stability," she noted, looking up at Thaddeus's attorney. "On what basis are you requesting a psychological evaluation, Mr. Winters?" Malcolm rose smoothly. "Your Honor, Mrs. Bennett has a documented history of anxiety for which she has been in treatment for years. My client has observed increasingly erratic behavior, paranoid accusations, and emotional instability that raise serious concerns about her judgment." Judge Okonkwo turned to Imani. "And your response, Ms. Foster?" "My client is a licensed clinical psychologist with an impeccable professional record," Imani stated. "Her anxiety is well managed and has never impacted her ability to function at the highest level in a demanding career working with vulnerable youth. We view Mr. Bennett's accusations as a transparent attempt to distract from his own documented infidelity and manipulation." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly at the counter-accusation. "Do you have evidence of this infidelity, Ms. Foster?" "We do, Your Honor. Extensive text messages between Mr. Bennett and his paramour, which not only confirm the affair but reveal a pattern of intentional gaslighting designed to make my client doubt her own perceptions." From the corner of my eye, I saw Thaddeus shift uncomfortably in his seat. This wasn't going as he'd planned. He'd expected the focus to remain on my mental health, not his betrayal. "I'd like to see these messages," Judge Okonkwo said. Imani was prepared, approaching the bench with a neatly organized folder containing printouts of the screenshots, with the most relevant exchanges highlighted. As Judge Okonkwo read through the materials, the courtroom fell silent. Thaddeus leaned over to whisper urgently to his attorney, who frowned and shook his head slightly. After several minutes, the judge looked up, her gaze settling directly on Thaddeus with unmistakable disapproval. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice measured but firm, "would you care to explain these messages? Particularly this one," she indicated one of the pages where you explicitly describe using your wife's anxiety as a means to manipulate her perceptions. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and I felt an unexpected calm wash over me. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally visible to someone in authority. The gaslighting that had made me question my own sanity for months was now exposed to the light, and in that exposure, I found my footing again. Thaddeus was about to discover that the narrative he had so carefully constructed was unraveling one text message at a time. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Thaddeus struggled to compose his response. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but he shrugged off the counsel, a flash of the arrogance I knew so well crossing his features. "Your Honor," he began, straightening his tie, "those messages are being taken out of context. My wife's condition has made our marriage challenging. Sometimes venting to a friend was the only outlet I had." "A friend," Judge Okonkwo repeated flatly, glancing back at the messages. "Mr. Bennett, these exchanges go well beyond venting. They detail overnight stays at hotels, plans to meet while your wife was at work, and explicit discussions about deceiving her." Thaddeus's confidence visibly faltered. "I made mistakes, Your Honor. I'm not denying the affair. But that doesn't change the fact that Ren's anxiety has been a significant issue in our marriage." The judge's eyes narrowed. "What's particularly troubling is not just the infidelity, but these specific exchanges." She held up one page. "You write, and I quote, 'When she started suspecting something, I suggested she discuss her paranoia with her therapist. Worked perfectly, now she thinks she's the problem.' Would you characterize that as supporting your wife through her mental health challenges or exploiting them? A flush crept up Thaddeus's neck as Malcolm Winters rose quickly. Your Honor, my client acknowledges poor judgment in his personal communications. However, the issue before us today is Mrs. Bennett's request for temporary support. Judge Okonkwo wasn't easily diverted. Mr. Winters, I'm addressing the claims your client made in his filing specifically. That Mrs. Bennett's mental state makes her an unreliable narrator. These messages directly contradict that characterization and suggest a pattern of psychological manipulation. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Bennett, you're a licensed clinical psychologist, correct? Yes, Your Honor. I specialize in adolescent psychology at Oak Ridge Community Mental Health Center, where I've worked for the past 6 years. And your anxiety, how has it affected your professional performance? I took a deep breath. It hasn't. I've maintained excellent performance reviews throughout my career. My anxiety has primarily manifested in my personal life, particularly in my marriage, where I was repeatedly led to doubt my own perceptions. Objection, Malcolm interjected. Mrs. Bennett is not qualified to diagnose herself. Overruled, Judge Okonkwo responded sharply. Mrs. Bennett is a licensed mental health professional, and she is describing her experience, not offering a clinical diagnosis. She turned back to me. Please continue. Looking back, I said, my voice growing steadier, what I interpreted as anxiety was often my intuition recognizing inconsistencies in my husband's behavior. When I expressed concerns, he would suggest I was catastrophizing. I trusted him, so I doubted myself instead. Judge Okonkwo nodded thoughtfully before looking up decisively. Here's my ruling on the temporary orders. First, Mr. Bennett's request for a psychological evaluation of Mrs. Bennett is denied. The evidence suggests Mrs. Bennett is fully capable of managing her affairs and participating in these proceedings. Small victory, but significant. I felt a tension I'd been carrying for weeks begin to release. Second, regarding temporary support while both parties are employed, there is a significant income disparity. Mr. Bennett will continue to cover the joint credit card payments and mortgage until the marital assets are formally divided. Thaddeus's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Finally, the judge continued, I'm issuing a warning. Her gaze fixed on Thaddeus with unmistakable sternness. Attempting to weaponize a spouse's mental health in divorce proceedings is not viewed favorably in my courtroom. I suggest both parties focus on an equitable resolution rather than character assassination. Outside the courthouse, standing in the crisp October sunlight, I turned to Amani. What happens now? Now we prepare for the full hearing. Today was just the beginning, but it was a good one. She smiled. The judge saw through his strategy. That's significant. As Amani headed to her car, Meredith approached and hugged me tightly. How are you feeling? She asked as we walked toward the parking lot. I considered the question carefully. The past months had been a gauntlet of betrayal, self-doubt, and fear. But standing here, having just watched Thaddeus's carefully constructed narrative collapse, I felt something unexpected. Peace. I feel clear, I said finally. Like I've been looking through a foggy window for years, and someone just wiped it clean that night. In my small but gradually becoming home apartment, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. My phone buzzed with a text from Thaddeus, the first direct communication since I'd moved out. We should talk about settling this privately. Court isn't good for either of us. I smiled slightly at the transparent attempt to regain control. The old Wren might have responded immediately, eager to avoid conflict, to keep the peace at any cost. But that version of me had been left behind in the courtroom today, along with the last remnants of self-doubt. Instead of responding, I silenced my phone and turned my attention back to the darkening sky. There would be more battles ahead, but for the first time and longer than I could remember, I trusted myself to navigate them. The texts Thaddeus had forgotten to delete hadn't just exposed his infidelity. They had inadvertently given me back my voice, my confidence in my own perceptions. In trying to portray me as unstable, he had instead revealed the foundation of gaslighting our relationship had been built upon. Sometimes the truth arrives in unexpected packages. Mine had come in the form of forgotten text messages and a judge who could recognize manipulation when she saw it.